Hey, Xenogears fans. Everybody loves a good origin story. Spider-Man, Batman, Fei Fong Wong? A lot of the videos I've made focus on these, as well as the character's front story, provided that they have one. But now let's talk about the real origins, the true beginning of how you, I, the rest of the fans, the players, found our beloved masterpiece. Before we get into that, let's get a little context to set us up. Now, it's no secret that Xenogears wasn't exactly a heavily marketed game. In fact, at least in the Western world, the game received essentially zero Squaresoft funded marketing. There were some ads and previews in magazines, but really nothing substantial, at least not that I remember. Of course, in 1998, I was only 10, so maybe my memory's not the most reliable. Now that said, of course, back in the 90s, there wasn't exactly a ton of advertising for mini games at all. I mean, definitely not to compare it to today's advertising by any stretch. Word of mouth in magazines were really the main way people heard about games back then. And there wasn't too much of that surrounding Xenogears. Although to be fair, the same could be said for a whole lot of underappreciated RPGs back then. I mean, the whole genre of RPG itself wasn't massively popular, at least not in the US. Even some beloved classics like Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy VI, Breath of Fire, the Suikoden series, they really wouldn't get much recognition until sometime after their initial release. In fact, the first mainstream RPG that helped put the genre on more gamers' maps was Squaresoft and Nintendo's Super Mario RPG. Now, of course, the game that really brought RPGs, and especially JRPGs, into the mainstream for console gamers was, of course, the title Square developed alongside Xenogears. Final Fantasy VII would receive the bulk of Square's resources, the most experienced dev team, and all the marketing that the publisher could pull together. You don't need me to tell you how well this worked, and FF7's genre-defining generational popularity, reception, and sales were absolutely critical for Xenogears. At least for Western audiences. See, Final Fantasy VII's success directly led to a joint company between Squaresoft and Electronic Arts in the West, named Square Electronic Arts. EA would own 30% to Square's 70% of the company, and would effectively act as a localizer and distributor for many of Square's non-mainline Final Fantasy games, games that would otherwise not have been brought over to the US, and if they were brought over, almost certainly not been in any major stores, like Walmart, Target, Ravages, etc. Now this might all sound a bit far-fetched, but in the 90s, Square was not the juggernaut developer and publisher that it is today. That legacy and huge fan base was in the process of being created at that time. So thanks to the partnership with EA, the Western world got Brave Fencer Musashi, Parasite Eve, Bushido Blade, and of course, Xenogears. The timing for these titles, and many others, was almost perfect, as anime was just beginning to gain major traction for the first time outside of Japan. I spoke on this already in my Cybernator video, so in brief, in 1998, Pokemon, Dragon Ball Z, Sailor Moon, they all began airing and started setting the US ablaze with anime, hunger, and passion. It was like a new form of media. Anime was in. So, with all that set up out of the way, onto the original topic of how we fans came to find this game. I always find stories about how people came to play Xenogears very fascinating. You know, it occupies a unique space. It's the kind of game that was essentially a AAA developed title, but received very little marketing and recognition. A high quality game with top industry talent working on it, but one that nobody had ever heard of. So, to start off with, I'll give my own little story and then we'll go into the story of some others. For me, I was about 10 or so when I came across the game. Sometime in late 98 or early 99, I found myself in a Toys R Us looking for an action figure. But I wandered over to the video game section and the cover art just really caught my eye. Even back then, I already really liked sci-fi and anime. My dad was a pioneer in this respect, and it introduced me and my brother to Robotech and Saturday Night Anime on the Sci-Fi Channel back in the day. Seeing the big old mech, those anime figures, the tagline, "Stand tall and shake the heavens," I remember begging my parents for a copy, and they got it for me. Ironically, this was the first and only time I ever bought a game at Toys R Us, and the rest is pretty much history. Well, until Calamity handed me my ass, and then I hopped down to Borders Books and Music and bought the strategy guide, where I learned all about the concept of leveling up and grinding. Even as a kid, I really tried not to use the guide very much throughout the game, and that resulted in what I would call an insane grinding session at one point, but that's a story for another video. So anyway, for me, I just happened upon Xenogears by sheer luck. Fortunately, through the awesome Facebook group, I found a whole bunch of other people that had their own really cool origin stories. Now, I asked this question quite a while ago, and I really wanted to make a response video, but never did. For the sake of privacy, I'm going to omit the names, especially on the YouTube version, but otherwise we'll just go ahead and roll. So the way some people seem to discover Xenogears was from a demo disc that was included in Parasite E, or that was in like the PSN magazine. Before joining the group, I didn't even know there was a Squaresoft demo disc floating around. I really would love to play a copy of that. There's also a subset of people who I'm assuming are a bit older than I am, who are members of what I'd like to call the old guard. You know, those hardcore gamers and anime fans who were keeping tabs on games even when they were in development back in Japan. You know, some people had bought all the Squaresoft titles because they loved them all the way from even Rad Racer, and they were big fans of the company. So it's really interesting to think about having a niche hobby like that back in the 90s, you know, scouring magazines, looking over ads and newspapers, just getting limited information back and forth that you could from Japan. I'm sure that doing something like that had its own charm, and I'm sure it had its own difficulties. So the next group of people, there's some people that had what I would just call like divine intervention or total twist of fate stories, where not one, but two different people were either clearing out or had found an abandoned locker with a copy of Xenogears just in the locker, and then played it, loved it, and joined the fan group later. That is so awesome. There's one post here where this guy has a game story and he talks about it, and this post is so awesome. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to overlay it and just kind of let it run in the background here for a minute. Of course, there are also a few stories of people who played Final Fantasy VII and then wanted to have another awesome experience, so they found their ways to Xenogears. Now that's something I'm sure Squaresoft was absolutely counting on. So excellent work by that company to release such high quality titles, like almost back to back. There were a few people that played the game because they were really into mechs. I am too. People talking about Armored Core and just seeing that awesome mech on the cover is like, hey, let's give this a shot, and that brought a lot of people in as well. There's a few rather touching stories of eagle-eyed family members buying the game for somebody for either Christmas or their birthday because they thought they might like it. And I really have to say, any parent, uncle, or relation that looks deep into somebody's hobby and is like, I'm going to find just that rare game, that special game that I think they're going to like, that's going to suit them, that is just the highest of props for me. Some people had the game in a bundle that came with the PS1, which I had no idea even existed. Can you imagine getting your hands on Xenogears like that? I mean, just opening it up, you see that awesome Red X anime cover, and you must think, man, the PlayStation must be the best RPG machine of all time. You wouldn't really be wrong there. Which one was a better RPG machine, the SNES, PlayStation, or the PS2? Anyway, so some other people got it in another somewhat traditional way, where they saw it in a magazine, Electronic Gaming Monthly, PSM. Those magazines sometimes came with demo disc also, which was paramount back in the 90s. And seeing the games on the covers, they really put a ton of effort into it. Loved flipping through those old magazines, and there's so many cool games. So someone to pick that game out of there, they must have had a really discerning eye. When you read the articles, you can see that the magazine staff are really excited about the game. It wasn't featured a whole lot, but as I said, once you look at the articles, you can tell that the staff are hyped and they are really looking forward to the game before it comes out, and then once it comes out, the reviews are all very glowing. So You can tell that the actual staff were definitely RPG fans and really impressed with the game, even if it didn't receive truly great coverage in the magazine. And that will kind of wrap up the stories there. I didn't go over every comment, as there were almost 200 of them, but I did read all of them and appreciated everybody who answered. There are people who've also asked that same question with different answers throughout the eternity of time, so feel free to look at those, because this is nowhere near an exhaustive list, of course. And for all of us who have played Xenogears, it's something that special and resonates with the game, and we could of course go on and on about that for quite a while. But every franchise, every group is made up of passionate fans that preserve it, and in this case, it's very cool to just see how everybody found the game and found their way to the game. I was just talking with somebody who was only actually 18 and is playing Xenogears and is in the group now, so it's good to see that that legacy continues to thrive and live on. Hope you all enjoyed that, and let me know if you'd like me to work on a video that goes more into the actual origins of the development behind the game itself. There are a few great documents and resources for that. I'm currently working on a follow-up video for Dominia featuring the rest of the elements from someone's request, and more short videos are coming. Lastly, I wanted to say thanks to all the people out there that have kept the legacy of Xenogears going on the internet. It would be impossible to make and produce these videos, to get inspired by these videos without looking at some of these old sites like the Nissan Sanctuary, Xeno Underground, and many awesome places like that that just have so many things from 20 years ago when the game was new, and they've preserved it and kept it up. There's a Retro Max site where I pulled all these magazine clips from. It is really cool. Anyway, I'm going to have a link to all those sites in the description or somewhere in the comments. And if you made it this far, thank you for watching, and we will see you next time. See ya.